where you were really thankful to God for something. But that those moments shouldn't be wasted either, where there's no words that shouldn't be wasted. Okay, so then she goes on to say that we should encourage our children to participate in a children's choir, but to be sure that they understand that this should be an offering to God and not a means of attention. I know for me, many times when I was involved in I guess you could call it a choir as a child, I wanted to be on the front. I wanted people to see me. I wanted people to hear me. Um, I wasn't really, I knew what it was supposed to be, but I wasn't really directly told this is an offering to God. So she says it's important that we remind children of that, and then we also must remind them that the overall purpose of all worship is to honor God and to bring Him glory. Just a closing to this chapter: be with your child. Paying attention to worship is fundamental training. Is fundamental for training children in the pew. Giving your attention to them is essential. So, in times when you're singing these songs, pay attention to your children. If they have any questions about what's being sung, help them out. If they don't know how to sing it, help them out. If they want to be involved, let them. Just pay attention to them.
Chapter 7 goes on to say that children have the capacity to hear and speak to things unseen. So this chapter is all about prayer. And so the first point that the author makes is you want to teach your children to pray and not to parrot what Christians say. So, you know how parrots repeat, like if, Polly want a cracker, they'll go, Polly want a cracker. But you don't want to teach your children to do that in their prayers. You want to teach them to have genuine prayers that they can say themselves. You don't want to teach them to say, Lord, thank you for my food. God bless mommy. God bless daddy. God bless mom's mom. God bless sister. God bless brother.
Now I lay me down to sleep.
Now I lay me down to sleep. You want to teach your kids to pray in a way that's not just repeating the same thing every time they pray. You want to teach them to be genuine and intentional in their prayers. So home training for corporate prayer is the next section in this chapter, and it talks about preparation in the home. Like learning prayer in the home is key to praying in congregational settings. So your prayer life must be active at home in order for it to be active at church. While I understand that, you don't have to pray at home to pray at church, it is always useful and helpful when your child sees it modeled in both places, because you don't want your child to associate prayer only with church. You want your child to associate prayer as a lifestyle, not as a once in a while thing that they participate in. Honesty in prayer. Children need to talk to God about things that concern their lives. And so one of the things that she had talked about was one of her sons prayed for her husband's leg. He was going in for a surgery. And so the son came in and prayed for the dad's leg and said, God, heal my daddy's leg so that when they go in, the doctors will be surprised that they don't have to fix anything. But then the child said, unless that's not what you want to do, because you are God and you can do what you want to do. And I think that was a profound moment for that child to want their dad to be healed completely, but to still honor God and to recognize that God is holy. He is gonna have his will no matter what. He's powerful, and he can, even though he could heal his dad, that might not have been his will for that situation. And then prayer for grubby hearts was the fourth section here, and this is talking about personal prayers. Then it says, during prayers that include a time for personal and silent confession, very young children should probably be guided with quiet whispers. So this is talking about like confessing sin or repenting or, talking about something personal with God. You should guide your child with a quiet whisper, just be like, teach him what to say.
You know.
I was like, he might not hear me whisper if I whisper, but.
Oh yeah.
But she was talking about how one of her kids in her youth ministry, or one of the kids in the children's ministry, was praying one day, and he said, God, you cleaned my heart up a couple weeks ago, but now it's grubby again. Come clean my heart. And that was really sweet. But that's what she's talking about, He probably wouldn't have known how to pray like that if someone hadn't taught him how to pray like that.
Okay, so chapter 8 it gives some practical ways about having children tune in to the actual sermon. So, of course, this is assuming that the children are going to be in the sermon with their parents. I know a lot of churches nowadays have a separate children's ministry where there's a whole different sermon going on, and there would be some different means there. But in the case that the children are in the service with their parents, these are some things that she says are really helpful and that were helpful for her. So one thing is to direct the children's attention when the pastor is going to be, reading out of the Bible or telling a story from the Bible. And basically she just says that pictures are worth 1,000 words. If they can imagine that story, that something that's really illustrative to them, then it's gonna stick with them. Jesus told parables because, pictures are worth 1,000 words, and it's easier for us to remember the stories. They stay with us. The next thing that she really says, and this you would have to go to your senior pastor, but she said, ask if they can, at the beginning of the service, announce a phrase for the children to keep up with. And as he goes through his sermon, he'll say that phrase a few times, whether it be something like, God with us. So then every time he would say God with us, the younger children would grab their parents' hand and squeeze it, and the older children would have to write down God with us and write what context they were saying it in, what he was talking about. And this really just teaches them to pay attention. For younger children, they have something that they're listening for, so they're gonna be, whether they realize it or not, they're going to be listening to everything else.
It makes them excited.
It gives them something to look forward to. And for the older children, it teaches them to listen and understand the context in which things are being said or being taught. So the last thing that she says would be really helpful is to have a special sermon for the kids. These can be done before service, after service, but basically it's the kids come up front, and it should be no longer than 4 minutes, and the pastor gives a short, how would you say it?
Summary.
Yeah, just a summary of everything that they've talked about for
like a brief
to make them
overview.
feel special, to make them feel like they've had their time, to help them feel like they're really a part of it. She specifies that when they come up, they shouldn't sit on the steps up to the stage and face everybody else, but they should be facing the pastor just like the rest of the congregation. They shouldn't feel like that is a different time for them, but that's something that they can really get the church experience in on their level.
Chapter 9 is about the baptism and the Lord's Supper. It's like one of the final chapters. So the first thing she talks about is baptism with your child. And we all know that baptism is a symbol of cleansing and inclusion into the Christian community. And so when you're teaching your child, or when you're talking to your child about baptism, you should tell them and teach them that, the importance of it and what it really means to get baptized. And also teach them at the same time that salvation doesn't come from the physical act of being baptized, but that it comes from Christ offering us salvation on the cross. The baptism is just a washing away of our old person. So she goes on to talk a little bit about infant baptism, and she says that infant baptism could be counted as like a parallel to the Jewish tradition of circumcision. It's basically just dedicating the child to the Lord. And parents can use the event of someone else getting baptized to explain to their children, what is baptism and why is it important and why is this significant. And you should always take advantage of the opportunities that you have to teach your children about baptism. The second thing that she talks about is the Lord's Supper. And communion helps us to remember the sacrifice made possible. Communion is to help us remember the sacrifice that made possible our reconciliation to God, to anticipate the coming of God's kingdom. So, they have the communion table, and on the front of it says, "Do this in remembrance of me." And so communion is the time that we set aside to recognize and remember that God sent His Son to die for us, and that Jesus laid His body down and shed the blood so that we could be set free from our sins. And the Lord's Supper is an intimate expression of our need for God's life to be our life. And going into that, kind of going along the same path, she talks about the anticipation of partaking in the Lord's Supper. And she says, just because our kids know what the Lord's Supper is, and just because they know about it, doesn't mean that they're always necessarily ready to participate in communion. She uses the analogy of sex, like just because our teens know the ins and outs of how that happens and how babies are created doesn't mean they're ready to start a family. It doesn't mean that they're ready to be intimate with other people. It just means that they know how that goes and what that is and what it's for. It doesn't mean they're necessarily ready to participate. And she says that the Lord's Supper is the same way. And even though our children they might know what to do, like they might know you take the little cup and you drink and you eat the bread and you say a prayer, doesn't mean that they understand it with their heart. There's a difference in head understanding and heart understanding. And so one of the things she talks about is that anticipation is the best preparation for appreciation. And I think that's true. I think that, if you have time to anticipate something happening, you appreciate it a lot more when it actually does happen. So we must be the example for our kids in the pews.
So the final chapter is really just a challenge to parents to create, to teach children to be Christian disciples rather than therapeutic moral deists. And she gives the definition saying that therapeutic is they believing in God made the teens feel good. Moral, the religion taught them right from wrong. But then deist is when they say that God didn't have much to do in their everyday life. And she says that, after a lot of churches heard this, they started trying to revamp their youth groups and children's ministries and redo everything that they had been doing so that they can create Christian disciples. And that's basically what this whole book is teaching us to do, is to teach our children to be Christian disciples. So overall, I thought this book was really good. It offered some very valuable insights and some very practical tips for parents who are raising children. What do you think?
I really liked this book too. Like, I've considered rereading it again, just to get a really good grasp of some of the concepts that she talks about, and like presenting it to the church. Yeah. So I think that would be helpful for a lot of our parents and even for some of our ministers there.
Because while we have a children's ministry, every fifth Sunday, the children are still in the sanctuary, and it's crazy. A lot of parents aren't sure what they're supposed to do. I look around and there's children playing on phones and iPads and coloring books. So I think
screaming over pews and
So I think this would be a really
valuable
really
material.
for
a lot of the people in our congregation, we have a lot of small children, it seems.
So overall, I loved it. I thought this was awesome. This was a great project to do. It was a great book to read. So that's all that we have. See ya.
Have a great day.